got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Some past episodes, Ido, I think people should check out. I've been doing this Israel business series, and some of the people are just amazing. Weisz of Mobileye. He talked about Mobileye and their journey being acquired by Intel for $15.3 billion. It had a lot of ups and downs, and he shares some of the downs as well as the ups there. Some of the other interviews, Jonathan Medved of Our Crowd, Yuri Adoni, who wrote The Unstoppable Startup, Ellie Wertman of Pico Venture Partners, just some amazing stories in that. So everyone check out those episodes for sure, and many more. And before I introduce today's guest, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. We help businesses connect to their best relationships, their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships, and we help you run your podcast. For me, Ido, relationships is the number one thing in my life. So I'm always looking at a way to profile and give to my best relationships. And I do that by allowing people to talk about their thought leadership in their company through the podcast and sharing it with others. So if you've thought as a company, we should be doing podcasting and producing lots of content and connecting with amazing people and authorities in your space, email us, check out rise25.com and email us at support@rise25media.com. I've been podcasting since 2008, before people knew what a podcast was, a lot of people. So today's guest, I'm excited to introduce you. A big thank you to Shalom Levy of Creativity Value, where they help Israeli tech companies. He introduced me to today's guest. And Ido Safruti, he's co-founder and CTO of PerimeterX, and that was started in 2014. PerimeterX, this is very fitting. I think, security is an Israeli cybersecurity company. I want Israeli security. Like you basically have to ward off a lot of people and attacks in general as a country. And especially there's a lot of cyber attacks right now with so much stuff going on in e-commerce, but they can detect and stop automated threats and help to block malicious code. They have PerimeterX Bot Defender. They have a Code Defender, and their products accurately protects commerce, media, and enterprise websites from all types of automated or non-human attacks at any scale. It also can protect sites from infected code that could leak personal information. They've helped some of the largest brands in the world, including Zillow, Build.com, Skechers, Godiva, and many more. Ido, thanks for joining me.
Great being here.
So I want to start off with, one of these. We'll go back to your roots, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, Prime Minister office. But I wanted to start off with like a Zillow. How did you first start working with Zillow?
Like many cases, I can't even trace the initial link. Probably some friend, VC, or someone with a customer. They had when they started, and they're one of our oldest customers. They started by doing things repeatedly themselves, trying to fight all kind of fraud. Initially, I think it was comment fraud. Them being a marketplace, comments and or a directory service for a lot of inventory, agents or other could have used comment to boost their thing, but also there is just like phishing. So people will put comments with link that will moralize that, and
like spam the site or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Spam the site, exactly, and that tarnishes the site score and things like this. They're fighting it, and they were looking for a solution to fight this because it was mostly automated, or the assumption was that it is done by someone automatically running and doing that. And that's what started the engagement, which ended up being something completely different. And this is what I love in this industry. You start trying to solve a specific problem. We had an engine that will know how to detect humans versus bots. We went and looked at the specific use cases. Loved the team, technically brilliant, implemented, understood the technology. Some of the things that we saw is some of the spam that was upsetting was actually non-automated. I mean, sometimes
it was manual. People were going in.
Yeah, you can have workshops of people where it's cheap labor and they can actually manually do that. And we help defend that. But once we were deployed and looking at their traffic, we identify what bots are doing that they weren't necessarily aware of, or they had it and fighting in other department, and saw a lot of value. And as we grew with the customer on looking on how to protect their accounts, how to protect their content from competitive scraping. Obviously, they own a lot of valuable data of MLS and other data that they don't want competitors to know if they're pricing or doing that. And this is how we started.
Yeah. Who should be using, I picture when I think of Zillow, it makes me think of, well, what other sites get lots of traffic that probably have to deal with spam and comments and bots just trying to infiltrate? Mm-hmm. Like Craigslist comes to mind. Like, should all of these highly trafficked sites be using PerimeterX?
Yeah. So definitely highly trafficked sites, but not only highly trafficked sites. If your business is, if you have a significant amount of business done online, attackers will try to find that. I mean, because the way criminals or cyber criminals are working, they're trying to look for opportunity. If you're making a lot of money on the site, then probably by them hacking or frauding or managing to do something to your site, they may find their own value. Criminals are working for profit. It's not this romantic view that we have of this hacker in a hoodie sitting at night in a basement and trying to hack for the sake of hacking. More and more of them are actually organized companies working in order to do that. Certain countries are allowing that because it's part of their economy. Certain places are less organized, but still they're doing it for the sake of revenue. So if you're doing transactions online, if your asset is your content, like Zillow, for instance, or if you're a retail store, if you're in travel, if you're a financial institution, anyone who is doing online business that is significant, you can be sure that someone is targeting them with bots. Someone will try to inject malicious code into that to steal data because they can then monetize it.
At what level of business should someone consider PerimeterX? Like, do they have to be doing X number of dollars or having X number of traffic where it makes sense? Like, what's a good criteria of people?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I mean, if you look at the overall cloud investment, if you're investing more than a few $1,000s a month per your hosting cost or your other investment, and again in retail, if you're making more than, let's say, a few millions or tens of millions of dollars online from sales, then you might become a target. If you're too small, again, a mom's pop shops around the corner that is opening a delivery service, they're less of an interesting target for attackers.
Yeah.
It is going and becoming more commoditized because the attack tools are becoming more commoditized. So again, it's all about barrier to entry. If it costs me X amount of money to operate an attack, and there is an upside. The lower the attack cost, the more broadly the problem will become.
What's some of the craziest stuff you've seen?
There are a lot of extremely sophisticated attackers. It's always fun to find them where in the glitches, where they're putting something where you can trace who is doing that. There is a criminal part. So one case is Magaecart is a big attack tool or attack method that is being utilized in the last few years, where what attackers figure out is instead of hacking into your database to steal data, if I can get some JavaScript code in your website, which potentially I don't need to penetrate your entire system. I may find a way to modify a script. The script is running on the client-side browser, and then will send information to some third party without the site even knowing it, because it goes directly from the browser, waits for you to type in your, for instance, credit card information and billing details.
Yeah, it's not
grab them and
inside.
send it.
It's not like inside their database. But if I'm on there
Exactly.
buying something, I'm typing it in. They're on
Exactly.
the site, like actually seeing it.
It runs on your browser and send the information directly to the attacker home server, where they can collect the information quietly, not interfering with the transaction. So completely, the channel of the user using the browser going to the site seems completely legitimate and clean. And one of the things that we're doing is we're analyzing that, and because we're analyzing how the application behaves, we're analyzing all kind of anomalies within the application, and we're seeing these kind of things happening. And one of the attacks we found some very specific fingerprints in it. The way they hide their code, the way they encrypt the code, so that if you look at it, it won't look suspicious to begin with. And we found a specific engine. Then we were running a search. One cool thing to do is there is HTTP archive and web archive. There are a lot of places where you can search in an efficient way the entirety, or like the few million largest sites. If you want to look, okay, who is using this library, or where can I find it? And we found the specific signature of that crypto engine, where we found a site using the exact same library that is selling credit cards. So we found the attack being spread on several commerce sites where they were silently stealing all the information. And
has your work, led to, you think, arrests or someone? I just picture like you tell the law enforcement, they bust down the door and like take the person away. Has it led to actually criminal arrests? Because obviously what you do is you're trying to like cut it off at the knees before it even starts, like not even gonna allow it in. But you may go, I'm sure there's companies that call you after they've been, most people probably get a burglar alarm after they've been burglarized, right? Yeah. So you get those calls all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, we did ask, and part of the things that, for compliance reasons and for many other reasons, we're trying to not collect any personal information. So there is a limit to how much can we help the authorities in tracing that, because we don't want to log the data. We don't want to be liable for any breach of data or something like this. We were called a couple of times to help the authorities in investigating crime when on sites were protected and attacks that were protected, being related to what we're doing or being unrelated, just because we log a lot of data. If it led to an arrest or not, I'm not aware.
Okay.
We do report things, but we're not necessarily tracking, and we're not being updated what is done with it.
Yeah. No, so what other type of attacks? Is there something that consumers can do to protect themselves, or it's just at that point, it's just the site needs to be protected?
Yeah. So there are different types of attacks. There are attacks that are targeting the resources of the site. So you as a consumer are not necessarily impacted. If account takeover, for instance, when I'm trying to just go use dictionary of users and passwords that leaked in previous attacks and going and hitting them and figuring out if I can take over accounts, nothing is impacting directly your browser or your server, but this is definitely something that then may impact your identity, because your identity may be stolen on this site and they may do transaction on your behalf. So just being aware of that. The basic thing is use a password manager and don't reuse passwords on different sites, because you need to assume, because it's a fact that a site will be breached, and users' name and passwords and other personal identifiable information will be breached, and attackers are using that, because the fact is that most users are using the same user and password with the same email password across the entire internet. So if one of them is breached, even if that site will then force you to change the password, you won't change it on all other sites. Using a password manager that automatically stores and create random password for any different site definitely will help you.
Take me, inside the mind of a hacker for a second. So like they get that data, then do they go to Amazon and banks to see if they can log in with the same information? Like what is have you seen happen?
So they're much more creative and much more efficient than that. And what we're seeing also is in the dark web and in all their forums, you're seeing specialization, or in many cases refer to that as crime as a service. So just like in the old days, if you wanted to build a website, you had to run your own servers, you had to have a networking expert, you had to build your software, you had to build every module. And now everything is like Lego blocks with cloud. You can spin up servers from Amazon, you have load balancers, you can use open source libraries. If you want to run a commerce platform, there are commerce platforms already, you just need to build your code. The same thing is what is happening in crime. So there are these groups or someone specializing in getting compute power in that sense. So I distributed malware to millions of machines, and now I can rent hours by the hour access or by access point to run payloads from machines which are residential, so are easier to hide. So if I have access to your computer, I can rent access for someone who wants to run things from your computer to do other things. Then you have groups that will build specific payloads. So again, if with the example of Magaecart, we've seen payloads that were the same payload that was used by different crime organizations, because they bought this engine. So now the criminal, it's almost like a project manager. You need to come with an idea of how can I monetize something, and then you can buy compute from here. You can buy a library. You can commission someone to build an engine.
Somewhere, and then they're like, oh, we are going to sell it to other criminals who will do whatever they want on it.
Yeah, and one easy example is, if I have a username and password of a validated, let's say, Amazon user, I can try and figure out a way of how do I monetize it, because it's not necessarily trivial. While Amazon stores the credit card on the site, I cannot just go and buy things with it, because they will allow it shipping only to the specific location that is already on record. And without it, I need the credit card information. So maybe I didn't find a way, but maybe someone else found a creative way on how to monetize an account on Amazon. So you find those users who are going and running campaigns, buying for, let's say, $1,000, a list of 1 million breached accounts that leaked from one thing, and then build an engine that will test it across thousands of different sites. Because you have a botnet, you can go and test this dictionary across thousands of sites, and then come back with a list of these are the validated accounts that I managed to break into. Then you can go online and sell them, and maybe an Amazon account will be sold for $5 an account, and another account will be sold for $1, and this will be then there are marketplaces for that, and the value there changes based on how much people know how to do that, and this is where you find many creative fraudulent ways. So one cool way is and this was done a few years ago already. The first popular case was with Fitbit, and this is warranty fraud. So while I cannot access your payment information to send me a new device, if I have an account and I saw that you bought a device, I can actually do social engineering for the support. And this is what was done for Fitbit, where people logged into this account and say, hey, the device that you sent me is not working. Can you please send me a new one? But please send it to this address. And then sure, we'll do that. You should ship back the old not functioning one, and then we'll credit you. We'll hold a charge on the card that you have on file. Obviously, the criminals did not send anything back. The users were charged, and then they complained. So there is a cost of supporting and then getting them the money back, and Fitbit lost a bunch of money on that. So they will find a way to be creative on how to monetize it, but there are very different ways.
That's amazing. It's this whole underworld. So, for people who don't know, the dark web, What is it? What's on there?
Okay. So the dark web, in a high level, and I'll simplify that, and probably will be then mocked for all the inaccuracies when you go through and try to simplify. But
I'm not, consider someone who's very technical will probably get on
Yeah.
your case. I'm
but the
not
idea
that
is,
technical.
the idea is, if I want to hide the identity of the server, the entire network, and there are a few good books about it, the Silk Road, on the Silk Road, and others, where and these are how do you leverage that. But it's originated from the Tor network, which is the Tor stands for the onion routing, which is originally a cryptographic method to anonymize. If I want to anonymize my identity on the internet, there is an IP address. So, you can identify and pinpoint an IP address for, I'm from Comcast in San Francisco, and maybe even in that neighborhood, and you want anonymity. So what they invented is a crypto engine where you go through at least 3 or 4 different nodes, and each one and encapsulating like an onion the layer. So I have the original message in it, and encrypting it in 4 different tiers, which are going over the network, so that each node knows only who talked to it and who it is sending it to, but it doesn't know who originated and where it is destined, what is the destination. So I can then browse access servers. I can use Tor to access the regular network, but then I can also, the flip side is I can also now connect a server to that and publish a server in a hidden way, in some way of the police cannot come and find where the server is because it's anonymized.
The people there, it's like there's crime going on there, right? I mean,
So it started again by purists. Not everyone who is there is a criminal. There are many people who just care for their privacy, and they want to do that. But obviously, when you put an anonymized market like this, it is heavily fueled by criminals. I mean, or things that are not necessarily illegal. It could be just to avoid taxes, but it also could be you can order a murder, you can buy weapons, you can buy drugs, and the same way, you can then hire someone to build a code that will hack into a site, or collaborate with people who are trying to do that, or figure out, okay, I'm trying to hack to site x.com. Does anyone have a vulnerability or access to it? I'm willing to pay that. Again, this is where the marriage of something like the dark web with Bitcoin and other places which anonymizes the source of money created a lot of opportunities for criminals. Not saying that this is the use of that, but this anonymity, this is
it could breed that type of activity.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It could be a breeding ground, right?
Yeah.
So before Bitcoin, how are people paying for stuff like that? Because obviously I could see the dark webs making people anonymous, which makes them so they aren't caught as easy, but they had to pay the people, I imagine.
So before that, dark web and these kind of forums were mostly used by hackers to collaborate and not necessarily directly to pay. So they would coordinate things, they would share hacks and vulnerabilities, or do things like this in an anonymous way. And some of them, again, also what is called white hats, hackers that wanted to share and collaborate, but do it anonymously for the sake of improving the world, but obviously criminals as well.
Why did you start this company? What was the idea behind the company in 2014?
So both Omri, who is the CEO, and I came from Akamai through an acquisition of Contendo. And we both share a somewhat similar background in both. Major part of our foundation was security, but then also building a lot of large web infrastructure. Akamai being a CDN, the company that Akamai acquired, Contendo, that we're part of the leadership team at, built a CDN, a modern CDN. So the where security meets web infrastructure, and especially web scale, was something that was very interesting for us, and something that we were dealing with most of our career. And we saw a need and an opportunity in the way that we felt like the way security is being done on web scale was wrong. It was sort of forcing, almost as an afterthought, enterprise security on web, which is a very different architecture, instead of rethinking on how should security be there. Traditional security is usually, let's put a gateway at the entrance to the data center or to my office, and let's force everything to go through that. And that gateway can monitor any request and decide what goes in, what goes out, and apply policies on it. When you look at the web, there is no one data center. And especially with the Lego blocks, or the many modules on how you build a modern application. I can use platform as a service. I can use serverless. I can use a payment vendor like Stripe for my payment. So a modern web application is built from sometimes tens of different sources, and you don't have one choke point where you can say, okay, I'll put a gateway here, or I'll force everything through that. And most of the security, web security models were saying, okay, let's route everything through one node. Let's put it in the cloud, but it's still, let's force this architecture. And we felt it's wrong. And we wanted to see, can we do something different? And
because people are using all these tools on their site, and if there's a breach, there's a breach, right? So if they're using Stripe or this plugin or
exactly.
this or something else, it's like there's all of these entry points, right?
Exactly. And even your own application, you may have a database served from here, and a storage, and you may run the user authentication in one place, and the inventory of your items in another place. So how do you secure all that, and how do you manage all that?
That's why you get
and
paid
how
the
do you
big
do
bucks.
that without adding a little, and how do you not force and limit the innovation of engineers? Because the reason the things are built this way is because engineers want to move fast. I don't want to rewrite something. So if there is a component that someone provides somewhere there, I'll try to use it. And what we came is with an architecture that is different, that instead of forcing a proxy or a model like this, we said, what if we can put open source or modules, components over to enhance the existing infrastructure of the customer, from things that are running on the client side to collect information from the end user on their behavior and their application, through integrations to CDN, load balancers, web application, and application code, and put a lightweight shim there that then delivers all the information to our cloud infrastructure, which is out of band, where we're doing all the analysis. And then we're both collecting information and then can instruct the infrastructure and make the infrastructure smarter by also being able to intervene. And we came with this concept. We didn't think of bots. We didn't think of client side. These were examples. And then we started interviewing probably 50 different prospects, different customers from different verticals, to say, hey, we have this crazy idea. What do you think about it? Is it something that you're interested in? What problems would you want to solve with this kind of things? Here are a few problems that we thought are interesting. Are these problems that you're seeing? Are these problems that you already figured out in another way? And we got very, very strong validation to the concept. And this is a beautiful thing that, again, as a founder, you learn is when you come with questions and you're not trying to sell anything, because again, at that point, we didn't have a product to sell. We had an idea. People are, especially here in the Valley, and same thing I know with companies in Israel, and I guess this is true across the world. People are very happy to share and to listen, because here is a smart person potentially with an interesting idea. I'm happy to share. I'm not committing to anything. So we got really great feedback and intros, and some of them became customers and design partners down the road. And after we've seen these 50 different use cases, we narrowed in on two things. One is the model is solid, and we got convinced that we as the three founders can want to invest a big portion of our life in building that. And the other thing is that the first use case for that would be bot mitigation, because this was a problem that we kept hearing customers that, yeah, there are a few vendors that are trying to do that now, but they're not doing it right. They're forcing us to deploy a box in our data center, and that won't work, or they're forcing us to route all the traffic through some through their cloud, or and they're just not accurate enough. So we started with that. So we built the infrastructure and the concept of a platform that can do web security in a whole. And the first few years, we're building Bot Defender, which is around detecting bots and preventing all these kind of malicious activities.
Yeah, I love this. Ido, thanks for sharing that. It's like you went, and this is instructive for anyone, right? Mm-hmm. You have 50 potential, you have a hypothesis, like this is the good idea, but you only know it's a good idea until you have someone who's willing to pay you and get value out of it. So you interviewed 50 people, you asked them the questions to see if it's a big enough, what the problems were, and mm-hmm. getting validation. And you found there was a big problem that wasn't being solved. And then you guys went out to solve that problem. What do you do from there? Do you try and bootstrap with the team? Do you go and raise money? What's the next step?
Yeah. So once we got convinced that this is something that we want to build, we built some, I wouldn't call it bootstrap. We built a proof of concept, mostly to prove to ourselves that also not only that there is validation for the need, but also that the concept and the technology that the way we're thinking of building it is viable, because it required integrating into, currently we have more than 40 different integrations into all kind of infrastructure. So we wanted to see that this is viable. And once we had that, we went and raised money. We decided to go and raise money. We did a seed round. Funny enough, the first the first person we wanted to present was a friend who was an advisor he was in the advisory board of Contendo, and I knew him from previous roles he had. He was the VP of technical operations at Facebook, who helped scale them at that. So really knew that. And it was more of, we have an idea, we build an initial deck, we want your feedback on it. His name is Jonathan Heidegger, and he ended up being the first investor. But what we didn't know is he was in a VC, he was trying to build his own VC, and one of the first feedback was, okay, that looks really interesting. I'm working on something, so I would want to invest, but I'm building my fund as we're speaking, so I don't want to slow you down. I'll make some intros to other VCs that I think may be interesting, and let's see if I managed to get in and at what capacity. And so it was great of him to make a bunch of intros, and that helped get the first investors, but also he ended up unintentionally being the investor instead of just advising. It wasn't as easy as it can sound. It's not that within a week from starting, we closed it. There were it took us probably a couple of months overall, with a lot of ups and downs, but this is how it
early on, Ido, when raising money, how do you know how much that you need to raise at the time?
It's a tricky question. I mean, you basically raise as much as you can at the right valuation. So I guess you don't want to give too much of your company at that point. Yeah. You want to give probably 20 to 30%, not more than that in the early stage. And it really also depends on what is the trend in the market. Is the right sum for a seed round now 5 million, 10 million, or 2 million? And it changes over the years. So I would love to say that there is a whole discipline about this is the budget and this is what I need to get to the next milestone. And it's more, there is a bit of that. What do we need in order to get to the next milestone, which is product market fit and having a few reference customers. But also it's about what is the market, how much can you raise, which helps you also build a budget. So it feeds each other.
I guess then at the time when I don't know when you raised, if you had customers at the time, but early on, it's harder to come up with a valuation, I imagine. So how do you come up with a valuation at the time when it's early on, you don't have as many customers or clients?
Yeah. So obviously, in the seed round, you have 0 customers. You have some reference people who validate that they like the idea. So it's really basically the team, the experience of the team. What is the risk on? Have we done things like this in the past? How likely are we to succeed? Is the idea in the overall right direction? Because it may pivot and change 2 months after you start.
High risk, high reward, I guess, for those people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And in that case, is the valuation at 10 million or 20 or 50? Just
right. Exactly.
Whatever, however convincing you are. I mean, the problem might be a huge problem or a small problem. It's more about the team and your ability to execute that. I think later on it becomes more of an art, and probably I know you're interviewing also VCs and all that, so I guess they have their own method of how to estimate or how to evaluate a company. But at the end of the day, it's also a supply and demand. If you manage to get a few VCs interested, you can open a bidding war. If you don't, then you're stuck to what you are.
Talk about early on, Ido, some of the lessons you learned, and maybe any interesting stories from Israeli Defense Forces and Prime Minister's office those days.
So lessons I've learned, I think it's about, again, even though I love technology and the CTO owning product and engineering in our company, I mean, technology is rarely the driver. I mean, technology is an enabler to solve a problem. The main focus should be always on what problem are you solving, who is the customer, and explaining that, because once you know that, using technology to solve it is sort of the easy part. So focusing a lot of that, focusing on what not to do, were things that even again, as part of my military service, you need to focus on what it is that you do, what will get you the most reward, what will get you the highest value for the customer. So this is an extremely valuable lesson. The other thing is, and this is one of the best advice I got, is to hire early and to hire for where you want to go. One of the biggest mistakes is that people are hiring for the needs they have now, especially in a startup that you plan to grow fast. So, today I have an engineering team of 5 engineers. I need just a team leader that will manage 5 engineers. Instead of hiring, I need the VP of engineering that will help lead these 5 people and build a 50 engineering team, because I don't want to swap heads every year. I don't want to hire people, and I want to help people scale. So if you think you may need marketing at a certain point, hire them. And again, it's a great lesson I took, and it's a great. I can say that I'm practicing it as well as I aim to. And one of the feedbacks and one of the comments we got, and this is true for our team, we're extremely frugal and we're trying to be very efficient, which was very good. It helped us get to where we are. But in some cases, and I think this is the main regrets I had on almost the actions I did, is there are many things that I could have done earlier. I could have hired specific people earlier. I could have hired a person for a later stage, where it sounds wasteful, or what will this person do? I mean, he used to manage 100 people and now I have a team of 10. But if the challenge is big enough, and if the vision and all that, and you have such a person, then you will get there.
What's some of the advice you got from a mentor or some of your investors that has proved to help in addition to that? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure you get a lot of feedback from them as well.
Yeah. So this one was definitely one, fire fast. Um, again, more about people. If something feels, especially in a small organization, when you're in growth, if you're thinking if someone is good, usually means that is not. If you're thinking about should I fire this person or not, probably you should. I had only 2 cases, I think, in my career when I thought I should have fired the person, and eventually I learned that I was mistaken. And in both cases, it was after going through a process of a hearing or going and talking to the person and being very straight and being very direct. So I think aiming with clear goals, clear feedback, even if it's harsh and it's less of a pleasant because environment, because you don't only recognize that. But this is definitely something that is extremely important. And the third thing, which is again all around people, it's hire early, fire fast if it's wrong, and then also don't be just strict. I mean, recognize. And this is something that I'm continuously learning to do better. Is how do I reward people? How do I recognize the good things? Because it's very easy when you build something to constantly look at what's not working well. What can I do better? Instead of looking back and say, okay, what we did is quite significant, or both for ourselves, but also for team members. And they appreciate the criticism and they appreciate the strive for perfection and how can we do things better. But a tap on the shoulder every once in a while and recognizing that what you did is great is for someone is extremely valuable, and you can never do it enough.
Yeah. Ido, what has been a hard decision you had to make when you were in the military?
So one of the hardest decisions was to leave the military, because you're doing it and you're doing it for a long period of time. And I've served for about 9 years. You're doing it because you believe that you're doing something that is serving a greater purpose. It's not just for the money, or it's not just for the drill. So I think that was one of the hardest decisions. There are many.
Ultimately, why did you? Yeah. That was 9 years. That's a long time.
Yeah. That might be one of the criticism I had in my period on the military organization. And then the military is run by military men and fighters. At the head of the army or at the head of any organization, usually you don't have a technologist or a businessman at the top. It's someone who started in the Marines or the Navy or infantry or something like this in special units. So there is sort of a glass ceiling for technologies or for people who can impact, where in tech, it's the opposite. So when you grow and when you start becoming, getting more senior roles in the military, intelligence and all that, you get more responsibilities, but also politics becomes heavier, like in any large organization. And this is where, at what point do you stop enjoying your day-to-day job, even though you see the greater cause? Yeah. And this is where I felt, okay, I really enjoyed. I want to leave in a good point and not when it's sour.
Ido, first of all, thank you. I have one last question, but I really appreciate you sharing your journey, your expertise. And everyone should check out PerimeterX.com. If you know of any of these type of companies or brands that are taking a lot of transactions online or have a lot of web traffic, tell them to check out PerimeterX.com. And, now more important than ever with COVID, like everyone, like there's so many people just on the internet. I mean, even you see early on, like the issues Zoom was having because of the explosive growth.
Yeah.
I mean, you just see security measures after security like patching on Zoom, and this is happening across all the businesses. That's just one that we probably use and we see. Like I log in, and it's like all of a sudden I have to like allow people in because they're putting in these security measures, and some of the stuff we see, some of it we don't. So check out PerimeterX.com. My last question, Ido, is, you were in Israel for a long time. Now you've been in the US for a long time. What are some of the differences you see, either it's conducting business or culturally, Israel compared to the US? And then when we're talking US, you are in San Francisco. So it's like, obviously you're from that lens, but what are some of the differences you see between life in Israel and life in the US?
Yeah. I think one of the main reason I moved to the US is to be close to the market. Israel is a very small market. Most of the startups and companies that are built in Israel are selling to other markets, not built to serve the local market. So the main difference when I moved was feeling, okay, now I understand so many things in a different way. It's more so in consumer web than in B2B, which is the business I'm at. But feeling, okay, this is where the market is targeting. This is like having Amazon delivery, having Netflix working, having a bunch of things where the target markets are, and understanding the consumer and understanding that business is done differently. People are much more direct and rough in Israel, in a much more direct. And I must say that in the startup world, specifically in Silicon Valley, it's closer to that than in the Midwest, where people are a little more tame. But it's very different. I think people are much, one obvious thing is personal life and the barriers in workplace. The difference between, in Israel, the work is where you get most of your close friends, where here there is a much clearer separation of your private life and your work life. And that, especially now when running a large US office and large Israeli office, how do you make sure that there is one culture overall while you don't expect people to really have one culture? I mean, you want to acknowledge and identify these differences. There are actually a bunch of books and recommendations on how different the culture is, but I think these are some obvious ones. Again, one simple example on personal life is the first answer when I was shocked after living for 6 years in the US when I started interviewing for employees in Israel, because while we live in the US, our first hires, we decided to hire and build our engineering and excellence center in Tel Aviv. So interviewing candidates, and the first thing they're saying, I'm 28, married with 2 kids. And these are all things that no one will say in the US in an interview, especially not starting with that when you're asking, tell me about yourself. And for me, it was like, why are you telling all that information to me? Because I was already spoiled and by living for 6 years in the US. And I think this tells about
why do they start with that in Israel?
This is how you start, because this is what you put in your CV, and people are very open about that. People are telling their age, marital situation, where they live, what they do.
The US
is
more of a divide. That just shows a divide between the personal and the business, and Israel is like all kind of one thing. I got you. First of all, thank you. Everyone check out PerimeterX.com. Check out more episodes of the podcast and Rise 25. And thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.